I am Brandt Krueger. I am going to be the instructor for the technical meeting and event production class, normally joined on these open houses by Mike Granick, who is what is Mike's title? Go ahead and click to the next slide here, because I want to make sure I get that right. Well, okay, it doesn't show me, but he's with ELI. He's the president, I believe, of ELI. I should probably know that, and I apologize for that, because Mike normally handles the introductions on that, but unfortunately he is at a show this week and was not able to join us on the call, so I'm kind of punting a little bit and handling the introductory slides that we normally get before we get into the syllabus and talk about what we're going to be talking about in technical meeting and event production. So the Event Leadership Institute, just a little bit about that if you're new to it. Kind of the 30-second overview is simply ELI really kind of set out almost 10 years ago now to be kind of the place for education in the industry, spanning a whole wide variety of topics, including not just the technical stuff that I've been involved with, but also things like how to run your business, how to price your services, the back end, the front end, the marketing, all of the various aspects of running a successful event business. I was brought into the mix probably about 8 years ago now to start help building out ELI's technical education sessions. And so very early on, we kind of hit upon this technical meeting and event production class. So a little bit about me. I'm Brandt Krueger, and I've been, like I said, teaching this class for about 8 years. Other than that, outside of that, I've got about 20 years in the meetings and events industry, working for first a production company here in Minneapolis, Minnesota for about 18 years, and then about the last 5 or so on my own, working as a consultant and freelance technician in the realm of AV and event technology. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slides there, and tell you a little bit more about the certification program that ELI offers. It's one of the only institutes, one of the only online education sessions that has this ability to get these certifications, these digital certifications at the end of the class. So once you've taken the class, you'll have the option to not only just get a I took this class badge, but then you can go one step beyond that and you can actually get the digital certification that you can post on your LinkedIn profile, on your resume, wherever you want to post it, so that you can say, hey, I not only took this class, I passed it. And you can get those certifications for all of the various classes that ELI offers as far as these more long-term investment classes that we've got, the kind of the 5-week classes and the 6-week classes, as well as all of the individual content that ELI offers. So beyond that, let's move on to the and thanks back to Alicia back at the home ranch, who's stepping through everything again, kind of acting as Mike. The class itself is a 5-week class. We're starting right away here. It looks like this is the one from last time, so we're going to be starting the next class shortly. Alicia, maybe you can drop into the chat when that next one starts, and we can get into that. You do get 9 CMP hours for that course. It's a 5-week course. It's designed to be run a little bit Netflix style, right? So you can do it as quickly or as slowly as you want, but over the course of 5 weeks. I always encourage people, it's kind of designed to be about 2 hours a week, so I encourage people to kind of stick to that timeline so that you've got time to properly digest the information, think about if you've got any questions, those kinds of things. So really, if you kind of play it right, you're looking at about 5 weeks of a couple hours a week. So really not that big of a time investment. I do always get those 1 or 2 people. Event folks are busy folks, and there's always those 1 or 2 people that when we get to week 5, that someone is like, oh no, I haven't even started yet. What do I do? It's okay, breathe deeply. You can design, the course is designed to still, even though it's a couple hours a week, it's designed to be, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time. So we've got things really broken down into much smaller topics. I think some of the longest videos are maybe 20 minutes long. So we've got it designed to be done in bite-sized chunks that you can kind of pick away at during your day or at night. So it's not this massive time investment because, like I say, event people are busy people. We're always on a show. We're moving on to the next show. So it's designed to be in those kind of bite-sized chunks. Moving on. And then at the end, just a reminder, you can get that digital credential that's going to say, yep, I'm certified. I not only took the class, I passed the class. Once again, that's me, Brandt Krueger, and I think I already gave you enough of my bio, so let's move on to the kind of what we're going to be talking about today. These are kind of the big 5 weeks that we've got in the class, kind of broken down into visual content and projection, audio and lighting, video control, staging and logistics, show management, speakers, virtual events, presentations, and graphics. The course is designed to kind of ease you into it a little bit, and then, you know, kind of get into the heavy stuff, and then kind of ease us out on the back end as well. We've also been adding to this course fairly regularly, and so a lot of the stuff that's been added as far as file types and things like that, and as I go through the syllabus, I'll kind of highlight this stuff, has been requested by folks that are taking the class, saying, hey, I'd really love to learn about this. Hey, I'd really love to learn about this. It is kind of a 101 class. This is not designed for someone who is planning on you know, becoming an AV professional. Right now, a lot of those types of folks have taken it, but it's not the you know, kind of target audience for this class. Kind of the origins of it came from the idea of while I was working on these events, it seemed to me that whether the planners were fresh out of school or they've been doing it for 20 years, a lot of them had this gap in their knowledge when it came to audiovisual. And I wanted to try and find a way that we could start to improve the conversation around AV and events. Kind of there's that fear moment for a lot of planners where they get their AV bid and they kind of flip to the end and they look at the big round number and they just kind of cross their fingers and sign on the dotted line and go, man, I hope so. And I wanted to start to work with those planners to say, hey, you know, you don't have to do that. You know, this doesn't have to be something that's scary. You know, we don't have to get bogged down in all the model numbers and, you know, this type of projector or this type of, you know, audio console. Let's see if we can kind of break this down into the basics and really have kind of a non-technical way of thinking about audiovisual. And what I mean by that is, you know, we don't have to worry about all of the different, you know, all of those little things, the model numbers and things like that. But if you can learn the fundamentals of how a sound system works, any sound system, not, you know, it doesn't matter what kind, whether it's digital or analog or anything like that. If you can learn the fundamentals of how it works, it's going to go a long way for you being able to then enter into an educated conversation with your AV and production company suppliers. So you're able to look at a bid and at least look at it and go, okay, now I see on line 3, we've got a JBL ZRX 522. What is that? And why do I need it? And then listen to their response and know whether or not that makes sense or whether or not it's like, I don't understand, you know, what does that mean? Why do you need that? Explain to me why you need it. And they should be able to do that in a way that makes sense to you. So that's kind of the origins of the class. Now, beyond that, it's also great for administrative assistants or even executives that just want to expand their knowledge a little bit. It's honestly, it's one of the best ways to potentially save money on your event. It's just expanding your knowledge so that, like you say, you can go through that bid and say, now, why do I need this again? Why do I need this? This seems excessive. And the more that you are able to expand that knowledge, the more you're actually able to save money, make sure you get the right equipment at the right price, and make sure that you don't get more than what you need as well. So just getting exactly the right stuff. So let's go through just real quick what those various 5 weeks, what we're going to learn over the course of those 5 weeks. Kind of like I said, we're going to be easing into things a little bit. We start out with some of what we see honestly in the most basic of meetings. You know, think about a breakout session or something like that. We're going to be talking about laptop and desktop presentation software. You know, obviously the 500-pound gorilla in the room is PowerPoint, but there are some other options out there as well. So we get into some of the other possible options like online presentation software, tablet presentation software. Those lines between tablet and laptop, those are starting to blur, right? With now we've got the surfaces and the capabilities of the iPad are ever increasing. The types of connector cables that you're most often to use in those types of situations, right? We talk about, you know, DVI versus VGA versus HDMI and all of the alphabet soup that goes around that. And just knowing, okay, these are the different types of cables that are available. These are the most common types of cables and, you know, why you should know them and what the differences are between them. From there, we go into video playback, whether that's some kind of hardware system or software system. Kind of the industry standard is Playback Pro. We talk about what does it mean to use something like that versus just embedding video and audio in PowerPoints. Like, still, that makes some people cringe to this day, the idea of embedding videos and audio into PowerPoint, because it went wrong for so many years. Internet access. This is something that gets touched on throughout the class, right? It just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up in one way or another. So when we're talking about presentations, do we need internet access? How do we handle it if we do? How do we avoid it if we can? And some of the factors to take into account around that. We then get into some of the things that we're starting to see as far as presentation remote control options. Being able to run a presentation from your phone or from an iPad or something along those lines is something that I love to do when I'm presenting. I can actually present from a tablet and then doodle over the top of it and write notes and take, rather than using a flip chart writing things, I can actually write on my iPad and use that as a presentation remote control. We then get to one of my favorite subjects, which is projection and display technology. And again, this is still kind of week one, dipping our toe into things, so we don't get too heavy into the math or science or anything like that. But we do talk about what some of the most impactful things on your budget can be when it comes to projectors. That is lumens, how bright it is, and lenses, the various different types of lenses that are out there, the types of projectors that are out there, what's the difference between LCD and DLP and 3LCD, and now the laser ones that are coming out, those kinds of things. Some of the topics that you're going to see in here, if you are an experienced planner, you're going to roll your eyes and go, and here, so the next one, the reason I brought that up is because the next one is front screen versus rear screen. But the reason that I put a lot of these topics in here is because at one point or another, I've seen a senior executive level planner who's been doing this for years and years and years make mistakes in one of these topics. So as a result, it stays in the class, especially at kind of a 101 level. So while you may roll your eyes and go, obviously, when it comes to rear screen versus front screen and all of the things you have to keep in mind with that, just bear in mind that I've seen people make mistakes on that at a very high level. So when you see something like that, don't roll your eyes too hard. Stacked projection, when you take projectors and you put them on top of each other, the benefits, the pros and cons of doing something like that, whether that's using it as a backup, so in case one of them blows, you've still got one that's running. We talk about kind of the controversy around backup projectors, where you'll frequently see on a bid a third projector that's just kept in a case somewhere, because it'd be a shame if something was to happen to your projector. Projection mapping, one of my favorite topics. We get into, projection mapping. What is it? How does it work? And actually, can it be done on a budget? And the answer is, spoiler alert, yes, it can be done on a budget. We get into some of the ways that can be done. From there, we get out of projection into some other display technology, flat screen displays, the types of flat screens that are available, where it's LCD or plasma or LED LCD or some of the other configurations that we're seeing there. The issues that can surround the different configurations of those screens and how no two screens ever seem to have the same inputs on the back of them. And then touch on a little bit the new LED wall technology that we're seeing, both as stage backdrops or hallways and things like that, using it for signage, LED walls. How to choose the right display for your event. We touch on briefly. A lot of times we've got these kind of smaller sections strewn throughout the class that are more just like hot tips, where we get into just real fast, hot tips. If you're in this situation, here's some things you can do. So we talk about some of the hot tips when it comes to IMAG. So actually putting, an image of the presenter up on the screen using a camera, things you need to consider when you do that. And then the other thing that we have strewn throughout the class is kind of after each one of these major sections, we have a section called Who Runs the Gear? And in those sections, we're actually going through and saying, okay, this is what an A1 does. This is what an A2 does. What do you call the person who's switching the video around in the back? What do you call those people? So we do the section of who runs the gear after kind of each section. And that's week one. So that's just kind of revving us up, getting into some of the fun stuff and starting to, kind of warm things up. Week two is when we really start to dive in. So week two starts out with kind of the anatomy of a sound system. And so I like to start with audio when we're talking about kind of how these systems work, because if you can learn audio and how audio works from a very fundamental level, again, we're not talking about giant mixer consoles and things like that. We go through the fundamentals of how every audio system works, whether it's the giant concert sound or a tiny little breakout room. All of those systems have the same kind of fundamental things, as part of their makeup. So we go through inputs and understanding the inputs on a mixer and understanding the input sources, what constitutes a source, whether it's microphones and the various types of microphones that are out there. We do a little microphone diversion where we talk about wired versus wireless and some of the types of microphones that are out there. All of those different types of inputs, that are going to be going into your soundboard, right, the mixer. And then we talk about the various things that you can do in the mixer, setting the levels, EQ, what I like to call sweetening the sound, all of those things, and kind of the flow of the audio from the input into the mixer and then out of the mixer into the outputs. And what are outputs? And how many do you get? And what are they? And why are they important? So all of this is going to help you get the right audio mixers for your event. Not too big, not too small. From there, we continue out the audio system, going to the amplifiers and the speakers and all of those racks and racks of equipment that you see backstage. And what are they and what do they do? And we'll talk about the different types of speakers, whether it's just a simple speaker on a stick or some of the more higher end like line arrays, or even the ultra low end where you've got ceiling mounted speakers or something like that, and the pros and cons to each one of those systems. From there, who runs the gear? We've got the A1, the A2, the responsibilities of all of those people related to audio. And then finishing out that with some audio quick tips. What happens when you're backstage and all of a sudden, the audio person is running around putting out another fire and you're responsible for putting the microphone on your speaker, the best way to do that. And then also some money saving tips. What is a wireless combo pack and how can it save you money? From there, like I say, if you understood as we went through the audio section, then we move on to the lighting section, and you'll start to see these repeating patterns of, the anatomy of the audio system kind of remapped on the anatomy of a lighting system. Instead of talking about inputs, we talk about what needs to be lit, the difference between functional elements or decorative elements, setting different looks within your room, the lighting console as opposed to the audio mixer, the difference between a light and an instrument, which is one of those kind of nerdy things, but you can actually show off some of your AV prowess by knowing the difference. The types of instruments that are out there, LECOs versus PARs versus LEDs versus pin spots, follow spots, moving headlights, all of those kinds of things. We talk about the different types and what constitutes and when you would want to use a LECO versus a PAR. Some of the accessories that are out there, such as gobos or gels or barn doors, and the things that are associated with those lighting. One of the next things that we get into, and this is where we learn some of the more less anatomy, more production flow type things. We get into touching on the fact that lighting is where a lot of those logistics start to come in. Really thinking about the location of the lighting console, the power that's going to need to be run, because lighting of most of the audio and video and display systems and things like that, lighting frequently takes the most power compared to the other systems. So setting up that power and making sure you've got enough. And then the domino effect that can frequently be created on your show schedule as a result of lights, right? We need to usually get up early in the morning, and if there's rigging involved, we need to get everything hung on the rigging, and then before we raise it up into the air, or once it's up in the air, we need to move ladders around so that we can adjust the lights from here to there. And then the small changes, small changes in giant air quotes, when your executive walks in and says, hey, can we move the podium / lectern? That's a whole nother discussion. 6 feet to the right. That may seem like a very small change at the time, but then we're going to have to move tables and chairs and go up on a lift and move a bunch of lights and things like that. So, excuse me, I'm going to get something to drink because my throat's crying out. And then who runs the gear of that section for lighting, and what do we call the people that work on lighting? That's week 2. Week 3, we get into the video system. Again, these are going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. If you understand the audio system, you're going to understand, excuse me, you're going to understand the lighting system. With easier and easier opportunities to go through. So we'll talk about the video signal flow. Again, the importance of inputs and outputs, what does and doesn't constitute an input and doesn't constitute an output, and why that's important as you're making your planning and scheduling out what kind of AV you need. You know, does a confidence monitor count as an extra output? Does a notes monitor count as an extra output? What happens when you're splitting versus routing signals, and the budget accommodations that can come with those, again, very seemingly small changes that you might make on site can suddenly add up to a large amount of unexpected budget adds. And then who runs the gear in video world. From there, we start going into staging and logistics. We talk about the staging terminology. Again, you know, upstage, downstage, stage left, stage right. What does all that mean? And how to keep it in your mind. And then staging itself, how big do you need, the different types of staging that you've got, the different types of decking that are available, and how intimately connected that is to the type of event that you're putting on. Some of the logistics stuff that often, again, gets forgotten, or you need to start kind of keeping in the back of your mind to make sure, again, that you're not getting these unexpected expenses. Where are you going to keep your cases? You know, so all of this AV stuff has to be kept in road cases. Where are those going to get kept? Do you need a green room? The benefits of having a green room. The order of load in and setup. Where it's, you know, push stuff in, get the rigging in, all that kind of stuff, kind of the general order of things on a typical event. Little section on safety and aesthetics. So all of the little things that you can do to hide cables, or you know, make sure that your cables aren't getting run over by catering carts, or your attendees aren't tripping on cables, those kinds of things. And then we get into crew breaks and how to make sure that the crew gets a chance to run away to lunch and you know, take a break from time to time, which leads us into the next section, which is working with union labor. Now, since the majority of people that take this class are from the US, or at the very least North America, we tend to focus a little bit more on union labor rules. But a lot of these rules are actually kind of worldwide, or have become norms. So even if you're not in a union city, per se, a lot of these rules still apply to your kind of average Joe Schmo AV company. So even if you're not working in a union house, it's still good to go through this section and kind of learn the basics of, you know, what is it, you know, when we talk about a walkaway break? What is it when we talk about overtime? And what are we talking about when we talk about turnaround time? And so that's one that I'm going to leave spoiler free, because that's one, if you've never heard about turnaround time, it's one of the biggest impacts on your budget when it comes to labor. From there, we move on to venue and site selection. Now, this is something, again, that a lot of planners have their priorities, right? They want a place that's going to be attractive. They want a place that's going to facilitate their event. Maybe they're looking for certain, you know, if it's an incentive trip, it's got to have certain amenities. So what this section is about is looking at venues with a more technical mindset. So this is what I look for when I'm at a site visit or looking at a venue, and maybe have some input, you know, with the planner regarding, hey, this site had these better things versus this better thing. So if, you know, maybe they're on the fence about something, but I see something technical that might help push them in one way or another. So things that we're talking about there are the availability of circuits, the availability of outlets, how easy is it for us to get power to where we need it, and how do they charge for that power? There's a huge variability from venue to venue on how people charge for power. So we go through kind of the various ways that venues have a tendency to do that. We talk about rigging points, what they are, and why you might see rigging point charges on your bill or in your contract. We come back to internet access, its availability, how much it costs, and the fees involved, and, you know, how big of a pipe do you need, that kind of stuff. And then negotiating with the venue. We've got a dedicated little section on negotiating with a venue when it comes to contract, and not signing that contract until you've had a chance to really look at how is it going to impact your AV world. So taking those things into account when you're choosing your site before you've actually signed to the dotted line. The next kind of thing that comes along in that process, right, is deciding, what kind of AV provider do you need, and bringing them into the process as early as possible. So the different types of suppliers that are out there, whether it's an in-house AV or an outside third-party company or a production company, all of those kinds of things. Since we're heading into week 4 here, there's also tips and tricks on power and internet. As we're heading into week 4 here, I just want to remind everybody to feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A section of GoToWebinar. Just kind of click on the little questions tab, and you'll be able to type in your questions there, which I should be able to see, and I can answer them at the end. So anything that comes up, feel free to drop them in there. Week 4, this is kind of a production hodgepodge, right? So it's a lot of the stuff that it's kind of like, this is more top level or management or logistics or tips and tricks, those kinds of things. So we get into tips and tricks when it comes to speaker management, keeping track of your speakers, knowing where they are in the building. Again, advantages of having a green room, maybe using event apps or things like that to keep track of your speakers and have them ready to go on stage when you want them to go on stage, put simply. From there, the production team, all of those, this is kind of a mini who runs the gear kind of thing, where the rest of the production team, whether it's the person calling the show or the director or the program coordinator and those kinds of things, those titles are different at a lot of different companies, right? So what a director is at one company might be different at another company, but the roles still exist. So it's still worthwhile kind of going through the production team and the definitions as I know them, and then you can see kind of who does what and who's responsible for what. So regardless of what they call it on your, at your company or at your event, you're still making sure that those roles are still being occupied. We talk about calling a show. What happens if the show caller gets hit by a bus and you suddenly have to put on the headset and call the show, kind of the do's and don'ts and the basics of calling a show, and communications, comms, systems, and etiquette, right? How do you do standbys and goes and things like that effectively on the headset, and some of the etiquette around that, as far as don't be insulted when you come up and talk to me, but I look like I'm staring blankly into space. It probably means somebody's talking into my ear on comms. We talk about a show flow, and I give you an example show flow, again, based on my experience of things that work for me. That's something that can always be tailored to your organization and your events, but I would go through kind of the basics of here's what I like to see as a show caller in a show flow, and the things that everybody on the AV team needs. We talk a little bit about teleprompters, kind of go into the history of how they came to be and why they exist and when to use them and when not to use them. I always really like giving folks a little bit of history when it comes to things, so that you don't just go, here's why. It helps me understand the why, and I think it helps people understand this is why teleprompters work the way they work. This is why we really recommend that you have an operator and don't try and just do it yourself. So how to prepare your presenters for using the teleprompters, budgeting and scheduling concerns. We talk about, this is one of the additions that we added based on kind of popular demand. We added an entire section dedicated to hybrid and virtual events. What are they? How do they work? When to use them? You'd be surprised how many people there, and you can admit it or not, just really don't understand even the basics of how to put on a hybrid event. There's still a lot of folks out there that aren't digital natives that are struggling to figure out, how can I put my event online? The best practices that surround putting your event on that line, the things you have to keep in mind about engaging that remote audience, dealing with these lingering myths that we're going to see all the way into kind of the new virtual and augmented reality world, dealing with the lingering myths of that it's going to somehow cannibalize your live audience. And that's, again, spoiler alert, that's just simply not true. Week 5, as we start to wind things down, a lot of the content in week 5 is stuff that has been added, again, by popular demand. So where I got started in doing these types of presentations, both online and in person, was kind of my observations from the back of the room of how can we make our presentations better. So we've got an entire section dedicated to presentation tips and tricks, and kind of my big 5 or 6 things that I think we can do, because there's a lot of books out there that talk about this size font or that size font, and I break it all down into these, if you can do these 5 things, and it doesn't matter what the content is, whether it's medical or financial or corporate association, doesn't matter what it is, here's 5 or 6 things that you can do to make your presentations look better, including legibility, resolution, brightness, contrast, combining decks, all of those kinds of things. Master slides. There's still an awful lot of people that would rather cut and paste their way through 1,000 slides than actually use the master deck. We add an entire section on video, graphics, and print files. So, more and more in the digital age, planners are being asked to deal with digital files, right? Whether that's, beautiful images that we're putting behind on our stage, or, smaller, simple things that we're putting on kiosks, or our, printed invitations, our digital invitations, our mobile event apps. We go through, again, kind of a brief history of how things got so messy when it comes to why there are, EPS versus AI versus JPEG versus GIF versus GIF versus, all of these different file types, why and how it got so complicated. And then we'll go into the print file types versus the digital computer and video graphics file types, the difference between bitmap and vector, resolutions and DPI, right? How big is too big? How small is too small when it comes to images and video? And then we'll kind of finish that off and round that out with Pantone versus process colors. So if you are doing print jobs, when you hear these terms thrown around, we hear about the Pantone color of the year. What does that mean? And what are we talking about when we talk about Pantone versus process? And that's it. That's the end of the 5-week class. We tried to keep it, again, kind of basic level 101 stuff, where you're going to leave this class feeling much more comfortable, at least having a conversation with your audiovisual or production company. It's not going to teach you everything you need to know to be a technical director. It's going to teach you enough to know when you see a red flag. So I'm going to take a quick sip of tea and give you guys just a second. If there's anybody that wants to drop a question into the Q&A section of GoToWebinar, or you can use the chat. Either way is fine with me, and we'll take it from there. Normally, this is the part where Mike vamps while I, get a sip of tea. While you're doing that, I'll tell a quick story. So I'll be Mike vamping. So I'll tell a quick story of an example that I love to use, and anybody that knows me has heard this story, where I was on an event, and the client came up to me after lunch, and I was doing the voice of God stuff for the event. So I was on the mic going, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage." And she comes to me at lunch and says, "Was that you on the voice of God?" And I said, yeah, it was. She said, "So how does that work?" And I kind of said, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "Well, is it just like you talking into a microphone, going into the sound system?" And I said, yeah, that's all it is. She goes, so there's not a voice of God box?" And I said, "No, there's no voice of God box. It's just me and a microphone, and it goes into the sound system." She goes, "Oh, I knew it. And it turns out her previous audiovisual provider had a line item of this thing that said voice of God box for, $100 or something like that a day. And, she never knew what it was, and she wasn't comfortable asking what it was. Now, as an audiovisual person, I can think of a lot of things that could be, right? It could be some kind of equalizer, that really makes the person's voice sound nice and deep. It could be a reverb box. I mean, it could be a lot of things. But what it also could be is just an unnecessary line item that, was just there to make a couple extra $100. So just knowing enough to feel comfortable of asking those questions, feel comfortable saying, "Hey, I see you've got on here a voice of God box. What is that?" And they either go, it's a regulator that causes a difference in the diffractionary. I mean, you could see this coming a mile away. Or it could be, it's an equalizer that we throw on. It just really makes the person's voice sound good. Then you go, okay, well, that first one answer doesn't make sense. And that second answer makes sense, but then you could say, okay, well, do I need it? No. Do you really need to charge me $100 a day for it? You know, that's a separate conversation. So once again, just having that knowledge has the potential to save thousands of dollars, and being able to Google, you know, this type of speaker versus that type of speaker and understand the results has the potential to save you. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in to the questions tab. So if you think of something, please feel free to reach out to ELI info@eventleadershipinstitute.com. If you have any other questions regarding the course, how it works, when the next one starts, all that kind of good stuff, and we can, you know, I can probably just look at my calendar here real quick and give you that information, because it wasn't in the deck. So give me 1 second, and the next one looks like, I'm guessing, the next one is starting in April, but I would double check on the ELI website, and just to make sure. So we are trying to run those a little bit more regularly so that you don't have to wait as long in between sessions. So I hope you guys will be able to join me in the next edition of the Technical Meeting and Event Production class. So once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If not, hopefully I'll see you in class.